Hey y'all, so the recording for the services section in my training did not take, so I'm going to do it again real quick, hopefully. Well, maybe not too quick, but I'm going to try to duplicate exactly what I covered in the training, and it may look a little different from the rest of the videos or sound a little different, but generally I'm just going to drop this right back into place where the recording picks up. So this section is services and Drupal. And what we're going to cover in this section is we're going to talk about what are services, what problems do they solve, specifically some problems such as global objects or use of the singleton anti-patterns. We're going to describe the solution to those problems in the sense of a service locator, and we're going to talk about creating services in Drupal. So the first thing, what are services? Well, service is just a fancy word that roughly means a class instance that is easy to get access to and reuse throughout a complicated system. So if you can imagine a large application that has lots and lots of class, and some of them need to be reused at many different points, well, it's wasteful as far as performance is concerned to reinstantiate that class every time you need it. A great example of this is in Drupal is with the formatting of timestamps into dates. So in Drupal they have this class called the date formatter, and that leverages the user-defined date formats that you'll make in the Drupal interface. But there are many modules who may want to make use of this class, and so what they do is they define that class as a service, and we'll get a sense of how that works shortly. But first, let's talk about the problems and how they've been solved in the past in sort of a bad way, I suppose. So a really common way to solve this problem is just to make global objects. This is a class you instantiate somewhere in your code, and everywhere else in your code you use the global keyword to pull that class into your current scope and begin using it. So for example, just continuing with the date formatter example, if you had a global date formatter object, this is how you would use it. The singleton pattern is also commonly used this way, where a singleton is a class that ensures there's only ever one instance of that class instantiated, and generally there's a method on that class where you can go get that instance. And so this is how you might make use of a singleton date formatter class. The problem with these approaches is that they very tightly couple your code together. So somewhere in your code where you're actually having to go get the global date formatter using the global keyword makes it so that this part of the code explicitly requires that that global object, the date format matter, always be available. And the same goes for the singleton pattern. Here, since I'm calling the class name explicitly, I've tightly coupled the code here in the custom code I'm writing somewhere else in the system to this specific date formatter class. This date formatter class cannot be replaced by the system easily. And so let's look at the let's look at the service locator pattern. Simply, a service locator is a class that stores a registry, or in this case an array of class instances that have a name of some sort, an arbitrarily made up name. And on the left I've created an example, a very simple example of a service locator, and you can see that it just has an array called services as a property, and when you register a new service you pass any old class into this register method with a name, and it stores that class in this array of services. And then to retrieve a service by name, you just use this method, get, pass in the service name, and then this locator will return the instance of that class that has previously been registered to you. An example of that code over here on the right, just sort of a made-up situation, is I've instantiated the new service locator, and I've registered a new instance of a date formatter class of some sort. And I've registered it with the name date.formatter. Now, somewhere else in the application, or like during the bootstrap or just somewhat arbitrarily, another part of the system could override this formatter with a better one or different one by just registering a new one with the same name. I have the code commented out here in this example, but I just wanted to show how with this pattern you can swap out services in place of others. And so to make use of my date formatter, I get the service locator and then retrieve the service by name date formatter, and now I'm good to go. So this code is an example of what you might write somewhere random in your application or in many different places in your application. So services in Drupal 8, the service locator. So in Drupal 8, Drupal has a class, a big class, sort of in the top of the name, in the namespace, called Drupal, and it has a static method called service. And this is how you gain access, and this is the service locator. And the way you will get a specific service by name in Drupal is to call this static method and pass in the name of the service you want. Now, it's useful to note that service.name is just randomly made up. Whatever a service decides to name its class is arbitrary. Some classes use a period between two different words, and others will use an underscore, and it's just sort of up to the developer to do whatever they want to do. So let's take a look, before we go much further, let's take a look at a sort of this generic service locator class a little more. I've got my example code here where I've created a very simple service locator. It's exactly what we saw in the slide earlier, but I've added code comments. And I've also made a date formatter that has the singleton pattern. I've also created a date formatter that is a service, much more simple, much more flexible. And let's see how that's used in the code. So I didn't do auto-loading or anything. This is just about service locators. But here we are with that same code that we saw earlier, where here's an example using the singleton. And so in this section of code, this specific class is very tightly coupled to this part of the application. And so if someone wanted to change the date formatter, they would actually have to edit this class, and that would affect every other part of the system. Down here, I make use of the service locator pattern, where I instantiate a new service locator, and this is, a bit of an example. This isn't exactly how you will do it in really any application, but just to show off the theory. So I instantiate the service locator. That happens somewhere else in the system. Your custom code probably wouldn't deal with that. But what you would do is you would register you might register your own custom service with the locator with an arbitrary name. And then later, every other part of the system can retrieve that service by arbitrary name and make use of it. And this pattern allows for the date formatter to be swapped out. So imagine that some other module decides that they want to create a better date formatter and replace all the date formatting throughout the entire system with their better date formatter. This service locator pattern makes it very easy. So we're going to look at services in Drupal 8. And what I want to look at first is defining a new service. And you do that with YAML files. We're back to YAML. So what you'll do is in your module, you will create a module name.services.yaml file, and then you will simply define your services name. Well, okay, you start at the top by saying services : That's sort of the top level, I guess, grouping of services in your YAML file. And then you'll indent one and you'll define a new structure named whatever you want it to be. So my.custom.service is an example of an arbitrary name. And then inside of that structure, you will provide a fully namespaced path to your custom service class. And that is how you define a service. So the next thing you will need to do is just write this class within your Drupal module. And so here's just another example. Here's a complete example of writing and retrieving, making use of our custom service in the module. So we've created a module called MyModule, and in it, in the source directory, we've created a class called myservice.php, and this is what it looks like. It has its namespace, it has one method that does something rad, and all it does is return a string. So this is a pretty straightforward example of a service that is not useful. But then to make this service available throughout Drupal, we'll register it using the services.yaml file that I showed in the previous slide. So you'll make the mymodule.services.yaml file, start with services at the top, give your service a name, and then you will define the class that will be instantiated when that service is requested for the first time. Now there's a bit more you can do here, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But here is how you make use of any service within a Drupal module. Here I have made a very simple module file, php.module file, and I'm using hook help just as some entry point. The hook help here is not important and actually doesn't do anything at all. What's important is this code inside of it. So to go retrieve my service so that I can make use of it, all I do is I call the static method service on the global Drupal class. And I pass in my service's name, my custom service, which matches how I registered it in the YAML file. That will return the instance of my class up here, and I can execute methods on it, do something rad. So this is sort of a complete cycle of how you create a service and use a service in Drupal. Now there's a little more you can do with it. There's a good bit more you can do with it actually, but some important ones I believe are these additional properties on your service YAML structure. One is the arguments property, which acts as an array, and what this does is it allows you to use dependency injection and inject other services into your service, so that when your service is instantiated, it will already have access to instances of these other services. Now dependency injection is useful, it's really good, but it is not within the scope of this talk. Just know that your service can rely on dependencies that are other services easily by making use of these YAML properties. And another important tag that'll come up for specific types of services is the tags property. The tags are how you indicate to the system that your service is of a specific type. So in this example, I have decided that this service is a event subscriber, and that will tell Drupal that when event subscribers are gathered by the system, to go ahead and collect this one as well, this service that I've defined. We'll cover hooks and events more in the very next section, but just know that these properties are available to your service definitions. Now, in the original video, I went back to Drupal 8 and I said, okay, so let's make a service together. And I asked the audience for the name of what the name of our module should be. And someone said wacky, and that's where we went off the rails. But here's what I have set up before I'll continue with the rest of the video. I have a module called wacky. Wacky has an info file, just very straightforward. And I went ahead and created a blank wacky.services.yaml file. And from here, we'll pick up the rest of the video. Okay, so I've made wacky.services.yaml, and the top level
is just services. And then we'll say my wacky service. And we're going to need to give it a class once we write one. And then, so the two ways we saw were arguments like this, but this is the exact same thing. So those are just two different ways of writing a list. And in that one example, tags are a list of objects. So that's why, yeah. Okay, so for my service, what we need to do is we need to write a class. And we know that classes belong in a source directory, so let's start there. Directory source. And we'll keep it simple. And we'll say that this class, what's something this class can be called? So we'll call it really should have brainstormed ideas. A wacky maker, what? A wackinator? All right, so this is the wackinator. This is, it's getting a little nuts here, y'all. All right. All right, so I'm going to write this real quick, right? It's a wackinator. And it needs to have a namespace that matches the Drupal pattern for custom modules. So wacky. So it's just Drupal wacky because I put it directly inside of the source folder. And so it needs to match the path. If I had put it a few folders deeper, my namespace would be a few folders longer. I can show that real quick, just to reiterate. We had lunch and everything. So let me make a new directory that I'm going to call arbitrary. What? Wackier. That's too far. That's too. All right. We'll call it wackier. Is that how you spell it? All right. So wackier. Let me move this in there. And so now it's in source wackier wackinator. Goodness. Okay, so now its namespace needs to have that extra folder as a part of its namespace. And so let's just write a method on here that we'll call. No, see, yeah, that's why it's going to get a little confusing. If we use the word whack as part of every single part of this module, it's going to get confusing. Is this all right? This is all right. So we're gonna the wackinator is a lot like a calculator, and it has an add method. That's it. keep this PG. So there's that. That looks pretty good. So now in my services, I just need to give it the full global namespace to my class. So Drupal wacky, which is the module name, wackier, which is the folder name, the wackinator is the full namespace to my class. Okay, so that's certainly a thing that happened. So now we need to now let's just show using this somehow, which is going to be. Let me think of an example. I think I can use. So I'm gonna make a module file inside of my module, and I'm just going to implement some hook that just gives me some way to add something to Drupal. It's not going to be important. So, and we'll look at hooks in the next section. So I'm going to say wacky. What's a good hook? We'll do user login. So every time the user logs in, this hook fires. And we're going to get our wackinator using the service locator. Let me use the equal sign here so it doesn't. And what did we name that service? We named it My Wacky Service. my dot wacky, oh gosh, service. All right, so now we should have the Wackinator in all its glory. And now I'm just going to, let's get the messenger service. So this is another service, and it's going to look a little weird, but Drupal messenger. That's like a shortcut to the messenger service. So sometimes this Drupal class likes to make little shortcuts to other services. I just let it do its own thing. I don't mind Drupal. You're fine. Then I'm just going to say the messenger should, what do we want? We're going to add a message that says 2 plus 4 equals, and then we're going to use our Wackinator. Let me break this down a little bit. 2, 4. Okay. So now whenever a user logs in, they should get a message that says 2 plus 4 equals 6. And we did that by using our own service. We went and got our service and made use of it. So let's see if this is true. I'm going to flush all caches just because I implemented a new hook in Drupal, and Drupal likes to register everything and store it in a cache. I'm going to clear all caches, then I'm going to log out and log back in, and hope I remember the password. Yeah, and it's that admin toolbar that puts it there. Yeah. So let's see here. I don't know where the URL is. There it is. Log out and log in. Two plus 4 equals 6. Right there. I need to uninstall a few more modules because I got a lot going on here. But there it is. So we made a class, registered that class as a service. Then later in the system, we went and requested that service from the locator and used it. That is services.